I'd like to express my appreciation to Dr. Robert Wright, professor of the social welfare at Washington University.
This is the one real success story in the United States.
Why did poverty become such a big issue in the United States?
Unfortunately, in the United States are at the very high end in terms of income inequality. And that's what's going on here in the United States. We're focusing on people aren't working hard enough, they're not doing this, they're not doing that, when really the problem is that there aren't enough chairs in the game.
Why the United States, as such a wealthy nation, struggles with widespread economic insecurity.
I think a really straightforward solution that people have been talking about more recently is the idea of a universal basic income.
The problem is that a large number of federal programs, unfortunately, still rely on this measure. We're going to embark on a trading expedition across Asia, where China will take center stage, showcasing how rapid economic progress can rewrite the narrative. Today, we will dive into the heart of a paradox, which is shining brighter than any spotlight and asking why the United States, as such a wealthy nation, struggles with widespread economic insecurity. Why did poverty become such a big issue in the United States? And why is it so difficult to end it? Then we're going to embark on a trading expedition across Asia, where China will take center stage, showcasing how rapid economic progress can rewrite the narrative. I'm Ali, CEO and founder of New Consultancy Services, which is an early stage startup committed to crafting sustainable development solutions, specifically aligned with the United Nations 2030 Agenda, goal number 1. And poverty in all its forms everywhere, as well as goal number 10, reduce inequality within and among countries. To this compelling narrative and compare the United States versus China in the fight against poverty and inequality, I would like to expand my heartfelt gratitude for some remarkable individuals and institutions. First, special thanks to the Brookings Sustainable Development Center, which is a non-profit organization in Washington, D.C., dedicated to paving the way for sustainable solutions. Moreover, I'd like to express my appreciation to Dr. Robert Wright, professor of the social welfare at Washington University. And finally, a sincere thank you to Unveil University in Kuala Lumpur for their invaluable contribution to our exploration on poverty and inequality in the largest Asian country over the last 4 decades. Infinity Insight is a dynamic exploration of causes and finding ingenious solutions for tackling poverty and inequality. And as I promised before, we are going to bring different perspectives together because poverty and inequality, both of them, they are a multidimensional issue. So, welcome to another episode of the Infinity Insight podcast. At 37.9 million, that's the number of Americans currently living in poverty, accounting for 11.6% of the United States total population. That's even though America ranks first as the richest nation in the world in the term of GDP. The United States is known for having this great abundance and at the same time Alongside that abundance, there is widespread of poverty and economic insecurity. But why did poverty become such a big issue in the United States, and why is it so difficult to end it? Poverty in the United States has been steadily improving over the past decade. I mean, from a height of 48.8 million people living in poverty in 2013 to less than 34 million in 2019. We know poverty is expensive. About 11% of the federal budget, or 665 billions, goes to economic security program. Child poverty alone is estimated to cost the United States over $1 trillion based on the latest research from 2018. Also, income inequality is one of the big reasons why the United States suffer from such high rate of poverty. In fact, the income for the top 10% was more than 13 times higher than the income of the bottom 10%. And presumably, as you can guess, the pandemic was made income inequality worse. The Gini index, which measured the nation's income inequality, rose for the first time in the decade by 1.2% in 2021. Furthermore, last year research by MIT estimated that a living wage in the United States is $24.16 per hour for a family of four. But the federal minimum wage is set at $7.25 per hour. That means a typical family of four need to work more than two full-time minimum wage jobs to earn a living wage. And of course, single-parent families need to work significantly harder. Problem with the wages are specifically worse for the workers of certain races. I mean, if you are looking at the broader population of people who are poor or low income, meaning one emergency away from being poor, we're talking about approximately 140 million Americans, which will our half of the population are people of color. The United States also suffer from a lack of social safety nets that protect Americans from poverty. It's also a system that many times is pervasive and actually creating poverty situation. I will give you an example. If you are eligible for medication today and you are also eligible for cash assistance, and you are also eligible for a SNAP, in this case, if you get a job that provide you even a little bit closer out of poverty, you will be lose all of these benefits immediately, which means that you are incentivized if you need a healthcare for your children, and you have a job that not going to provide it right away to not look for employment, and that is going to pay you an amount, and that's going to make you ineligible for certain benefits. So while people are working hard for upward mobility, the system that the United States has in place don't give them the grace to be able to come out of poverty and provide their agency to create the opportunity for upward mobility. According to the Census Bureau, the official poverty measure in the United States today is based on measuring poverty calculation from the mid 1960s. It's calculated by comparing pre-tax income against a threshold set at 3 times the cost of a minimum diet in 1963. The problem is that a large number of federal programs, unfortunately, still rely on this measure to figure out who is eligible for assistance and welfare. But most of them don't consider about certain obvious indicators. I mean, to start, they normally look at pre-tax income, which is not what people take home every day. So that doesn't make sense. They also don't look at different family composition, which impact how a family might spend money. And if you are a type of family that has both of your parents living with you, you are going to spend more. Plus, they don't look at expense around food and childcare. And in many ways, it's incredibly out of date because it has not kept up with the way life has changed for most Americans. As a response to this criticism, the supplemental poverty measure was developed during the Obama administration in 2011 as an improvement over the existing measure. Supplemental poverty measure incorporate into the measurement both of the cost of the basic needs like food, clothing, and utilities, but also the government transformation programs. So you could see the effect of the government programs in addressing poverty and economic insecurity. It also take into account geographical differences. So the supplemental poverty threshold is more of a range depending on where you live, your household size, and your housing status, and that means it's more comprehensive. In that way, it's an improvement on the official poverty measure. However, some experts argue that even the supplemental poverty measure isn't the perfect method, while it don't look at close the gap on the certain indicators that the original poverty measure was looking into consideration. So it didn't go far enough. The Census Bureau told that both the official poverty measure and the supplemental poverty measure provide consistent data and poverty measurement, and that the bureau continues to strive to innovate and improve the design and measurement of their well-being statistics. The difficulty in measuring poverty is also that some experts argue that poverty isn't as serious of an issue as it's made to believe. So unless you can get an accurate number of just how prevalent poverty is in the United States, attempting to eradicate is close to impossible. That means if we don't have a baseline, there is no way we are even going to solve this problem. And furthermore, there is another point which I have to mention. If COVID has proven anything, in my view, uh, poverty is an issue that can be resolved with the right policy. I mean, look at how government assistance lead to a significant decline in supplemental poverty measure and lifting around 45.4 million Americans out of poverty during the height of the pandemic. That means policy, I would say, is one of our strongest tools in fully addressing and eradicating poverty and inequality. It's where we can define what the problems are and then design and implement projects that we need to address the true extent of poverty. Also, as you know, more targeted social programs could have a significant impact on the impoverished community. Some of those programs might include an extended child tax credit, and kind of which Americans saw in 2021, where when it was expanded during the pandemic and raising the minimum wage immediately to at least $15 an hour, but then moving toward in a living wage and guaranteeing that everybody who want to work has access to a good paying job. To conclude this argue, I would like to invite you to listen to Professor Mark Robert. And for those who don't know him, I have to say he's a social scientist and professor of social welfare at Washington University, and known for his work on poverty, inequality, economic, as well as social policy. So let's give it a listen together.
Unfortunately, in the United States, are at the very high end in terms of income inequality. And so what happens is when the distance gets further and further away, the rungs on the ladder get further away, and it's harder for people to climb those rungs out of poverty into the middle and to the upper class. There are also really high costs on an individual level. Poverty leads to more anxiety, it leads to more stress, it leads to more health problems, all kinds of things that amplify the effect of poverty. Most countries, for example, European countries, have what's known as a child allowance, where if you have a child, you get a certain amount of monthly income to help raise that child. That's pretty common, but in the United States, we don't have anything like that. And in the United States, we don't have universal benefits, for example, healthcare or childcare. Really good example that I'll use is that of the elderly. This is the one real success story in the United States, is we've really been able to reduce the poverty rates amongst the elderly as a result of primarily Social Security and Medicare. So if we didn't have those programs today, poverty rates for the elderly would go from about 10% to 40%. And that shows you the dramatic impact that government programs and policies can have on reducing poverty. Another way of measuring poverty, and this is a way that European countries and other countries use, is what's known as a relative measure. And so they say, if you fall below 50% of median income, then we're going to count you in poverty. So if the median income was $70,000 and you fell below $35,000, you'd be counted as being in poverty. I think a really straightforward solution that people have been talking about more recently is the idea of a universal basic income. So here the idea is that if poverty is a lack of income, then a very straightforward way is to transfer some income. Here's the analogy I would use to get people to shift their way of thinking, and it's the analogy of musical chairs. Let's say we have 10 people playing and 8 chairs available. Now, who's going to win and lose at that game? Well, if we focus on the individual level factors, people that were in a bad position when the music stopped and so on. But if we focus on the structure of the game, then 2 people are going to lose out regardless of the individual attributes. And that's what's going on here in the United States. We're focusing on people aren't working hard enough, they're not doing this, they're not doing that, when really the problem is that there aren't enough chairs in the game.
It's a super tough question. Are there enough chairs in the game? I'm not sure about this, but keep it in your mind, and let's move to the China. We're going to continue our journey to East Asia. Progress in the fight against poverty has made in the poorest large countries in the Asia in the last 14 years, and pace of progress in eliminating poverty has been particularly impressive in China. This graph shows the reduction over time in the proportion of the population that receives a daily income of $2.13 or less. And as you can see, in 1990, China, India, Pakistan, and Vietnam, they had poverty rate that were about 18%. But by 2018, the poverty rate had dropped to under 5% in China and 7% in Vietnam. It was such a great achievement And actually, there are two main reasons for the spectacular success of China and Vietnam in reducing poverty. First, the Chinese and Vietnamese government not only focused their effort on keeping the growth rate of GDP high, but also on implementing programs that reduce poverty directly. And second, the government changed their method of bringing people out of poverty as the nature of the shrinking pool of poor people changed over time. In the case of China, the anti-poverty program could be divided into three phases. The first phase is the 1978 to 1999 period, when sustained high economic growth and underemployment in the economy. In this phase, China engineered a very pace of industrialization that transferred Chinese peasants on a massive scale out from a low productivity agricultural sector into the high productivity manufacturing sector. The outcome was that the income of farmer agriculture workers grew up and hence poverty reduced. Furthermore, as the pool of the surplus agriculture was shrunk over time, the wage of the rural workers increased even faster, thus pulling even more people out of the poverty. The important driver of poverty reduction in 1978 to 1999, the first phase was a large trickling down effect generated by boosting GDP growth or a growth rate of 9.8% annually. The second phase was from 2000 to 2011, when the government concentrated on economic development in poor provinces. The primary geographical characteristic of poverty in China at the end of 20th century was that the poverty rate increased as one traveled westward away from the coastline. And in response to this growing development gap between coastline China and inland China, the government launched the Western Chinese Development Agenda, which was funded very generously to build a feasible infrastructure like roads, airports, and bridges, and to build new cities with modern hospitals, universities, and public housing. Moreover, each of the western provinces was partnered with the coastal provinces to facilitate their upgrading of their administrative software and knowledge base of western provinces. And finally, the third phase is from 2000 to the present, when the Chinese government targeted its effort on reminding impoverished individuals. Chinese President Xi Jinping reoriented poverty reduction drastically to focus on poor individuals. So that was a switch from focusing on poor areas to focusing on poor individuals. Every individual in extreme poverty category, which is every individual with a daily income of $2.30 or less, was recorded in a national poverty registry, tracked over time, and given tailored assistance to bring him over the extreme poverty line. And we have to remember that China is one of the most populous countries in the world, with more than 1,425,000,000 population. So throughout this individual targeted approach, the Chinese government was able to announce at the end of 2020 that it had wiped out the extreme poverty in China. And of course, again, it must be mentioned that poverty is a multidimensional phenomenon. which is imperfectly captured by income, emphasized on poverty line approach. But the poor people are also excluded in other fundamental ways, like adequate nutrition and reasonable length for the lifespans. For instance, stunting, which is retarded growth in young people, is the most obvious indicator of malnutrition. Here, we have another graph. It shows the stunting rate of this six Asian country over time. And as you can see, progress has been made in all six countries. But there are some surprises in it. In my view, the most surprising feature of this graph is that Malaysia, which has a per capita income that is twice that of China today, has a stunting rate of 20% in 2018, which is four times higher than the Chinese stunting rate of 4.8%. So what we have seen in this graph is that China has not only made enormous progress in reducing poverty, but also in reducing the stunting rate. And it had the slowest stunting rate in this group of six Asian countries. Let's come back to the point that Malaysia, which had stunting rate of 20%, has also zero poverty rate in 2018. That's true, zero poverty rate in 2018. And it goes on to show that they have to look at poverty in more than one dimension. The next dimension by which we can look at poverty is that the infant mortality rate. The infant mortality rate is the number of infant deaths for every 1,000 live births. Here, the final graph that we have shows that the infant mortality rate have declined for all the six countries over time. But the progress has been quite different across countries. Again, as you can see, the infant mortality rate in China, the Philippines, and Vietnam started at roughly 50 in 1979, but by 2019, it was 6.8 in China, and 16 in Vietnam, and 22 in the Philippines. The infant mortality rate in Malaysia, which had started off 30 in 1976, was 7.3 in 2019, which is higher than China again. And throughout this period, Malaysia was at least twice as rich as China. Well, it's time to wrap up today's episode. We have navigated through different approach in the fight against poverty by the United States and China. The optimistic message which comes from this episode is that countries can achieve amazing progress on this battlefield. And as we saw, China is an example of how one country could do it by constantly focusing on these three dimensions of poverty and changing the policy instruments. And we have to remember poverty is a multidimensional issue. So we're just getting started, and we want you to be part of our movement. Honestly, your engagement means the world to us. So please, if you enjoyed this insightful episode, don't forget to hit subscribe button on our YouTube channel. Join our community, share the knowledge, and let's shape a better world together. Believe it or not, change is possible when we stand together. So until next episode, keep those awesome work flowing, stay inspired, and keep Infinity Insight alive. I will see you soon. Bye.